I'm sure we know what the discussion is that's going to come up today. So let's get the laugh out first. And then on a lighter note, before I begin with the formal part, I was joking with someone this morning, and I was having some banana bread with my daughters yesterday morning. And the next moment I see General uMkhwanazi in his task force uniform on TV, and the entire Sunday turned into a Monday. So it's been a very busy 24 hours. On a serious note, I want to speak to integrity in the South African Police Service. Last week, we had the budget review, discussion, feedback, and the adoption of the budget. And one of the critical things that I mentioned was the integrity testing process in the South African Police Service. Now, the damning allegations made by the KZN Provincial Commissioner yesterday, Lieutenant General uMkhwanazi, has placed the necessary focus on the integrity, or rather the lack thereof, in the entire criminal justice system. This is not just an indictment on the South African Police Service or parts of it. It's an indictment on the criminal justice system. If what has been said is true, it explains why the system has not been able to effectively arrest the ever-increasing criminality in the country. The allegations are not only damning to a few individuals, it indicates a whole systematic weakening of the police to enable corruption and to undermine the rule of law. The revelations paint a picture of a very weak system, a very broken system, obviously a corrupt one, corruption riddled in the entire institution of the criminal justice system, and a system that can be manipulated at the whims of a connected few, politically connected or otherwise. In terms of SAPS, it's important to emphasize that they have a constitutional mandate to ensure the safety and security for everyone within the borders of South Africa. And for this calling to be effective, it requires every single one of the men and women in blue to be beyond reproach. And unfortunately, the events of the past 2 to 3 weeks, not only what happened yesterday, indicates something else. And it, in my opinion, has proven that there really is a significant integrity deficit in many, many parts of the South African Police Service. The arrests of senior officers in the crime intelligence environment over the last few weeks for allegations of fraud and corruption, as well as yesterday's revelations, require urgent action from the President. Now, I think it's one thing that many of us can speculate and move from one side to the other, but it's very important to emphasize the role that the President has to play. I'll come back to that now. As the head of state, the President has a responsibility to implement an intensive investigation into the corruption allegations at SAPS to protect and promote the credibility of the service. The committee welcomes, and this is the Police Committee, the assurance of the President in his latest press release to give the matter due regard upon his return from Brazil, but has urged that this matter be priority number one. Over and above this, the revelations have given credence to the call by the committee for an extensive skills and lifestyle audit. There's not one member of the Police Portfolio Committee that doesn't constantly question the lack of lifestyle audits, and obviously the resolution of Parliament last year that a skills audit must be urgently done. I actually want to go as far as saying we need to go through an entire integrity commission to get to the bottom of the rot in the South African Police Service. In terms of the revelations that have given credence to the call by the committee for these skills and lifestyle audits, starting with all senior management within the South African Police Service, and especially the crime intelligence environment. Every month, as I said, this call is repeated. What is clear is that the accountability is necessary and obviously urgent, and that the people deserve to know and feel that the South African Police Service is made of men and women who are ready to serve in the interest of the country and not for selfish reasons. We cannot continue one more day with criminals masquerading as police officers. For its part, the committee will have to determine the need for an urgent meeting where the protagonists are called to account. The entire committee is in agreement that such a session must be held, and we have already written to the Speaker, as well as the House Chairperson, for the relevant processes to take place. I wrote to the Speaker of the National Assembly yesterday to also ask for an urgent debate on the integrity of the South African Police Service and the implications of the revelations on the credibility and standing of the South African Police Service in the fight against crime. In 2023, you would remember that the minister then, Minister Bheki Cele, stated that 5,000 police officers had been arrested since 2019, and of those, 4,000 were still employed by the South African Police Service. While these numbers might have changed now, probably increased, unfortunately, the continued erosion of integrity is advanced by the nonchalant attitude to consequence management within the South African Police Service. Words without action will allow for lip service to continue, and the lip service assurance on integrity within the South African Police Service. It is high time that both the men and women in blue with an inclination for criminality are fired from the service. Before I go through the action steps proposed, just want to name a few examples that I think are critical to mention. Over the past year, the committee has raised several big questions about corruption, about ill-considered appointments, whether in the Hawks or the South African Police Service, people that get promoted that are certainly not beyond reproach. And to this day, in the majority of cases, we never get an answer to clarify. And we have given more than enough opportunity to get clarity on many of the questions that we have asked. And one of the examples that we used over the last few weeks was quite close to here, in the Cape Flats, where at least 4 or 5 specific examples of members that were arrested for drug trafficking, for involvement of selling dockets, of transporting drugs in police vehicles in uniform, are back at the station, and they are expected to provide frontline services. How is that fair to the general public while we know of criminality in the ranks? I'll come back to that again shortly. Some of the following immediate solutions could be considered, and this is specifically with regard to the integrity challenges within the South African Police Service. The first one is an appointment of some kind of an ad hoc inquiry or commission with a clear timeline to urgently investigate the allegations. And I must emphasize with this the importance of the dockets that were mentioned yesterday by General uMkhwanazi, that those dockets or the processes regarding them should be frozen until an independent inquiry can be done. I think it is a massive risk to just leave them in the system after what we heard yesterday. The second one, is an external independent body to undertake the lifestyle audits for all senior officers from brigadier and upwards. Why do I say that? There's a massive question about vetting, security clearance, etc. in the senior ranks of the South African Police Service. Very often 2 things are raised. We've asked questions regarding vetting. We very often hear that there's a backlog with the State Security Agency, and therefore vetting is behind. Now, I want to ask you how it's possible that appointments still get made despite that backlog. Surely we can't allow for someone to enter into a position that they haven't been cleared for and don't have the relevant security clearance if it is a critical need for them to be vetted for such. When you become a brigadier, you must have top secret security clearance. And we have it on good authority that many of them do not have top secret security clearance, despite being in those positions, and other ones that are also higher ranked too. I think another part, before I go on with the list, that I must mention with this is also the training excuse that we very often get. Very often we say, but someone isn't qualified for a specific position. The answer that we get is that they would go for a course. But how were they selected in the first place if they didn't complete the necessary courses in the first place? That begs the question. The fourth one is an independent body to undertake the vetting exercise of all senior SAPS officers. And I say this because I must be honest with you today, of what I've seen in the last month, I do not have trust in the authorities at the moment to conduct those very vetting exercises on their own. I think it is critical for some kind of an independent institution or body to play a role in that process. The fifth one is the reconfiguration of the crime intelligence environment to ensure only fit and proper individuals are employed in that environment. We must be very careful that we don't just replace someone with the next best option or that the relevant investigation isn't completed. We must make sure that it is fit and proper. I see calls for within 24 hours, X must be done. But I want to tell you that the rot is so serious and the problems we have, it causes such chaos that whether it's 24 hours or 72 hours, it's not going to change the situation. We need to do things right and according to the book and make sure if we clean, it needs to be done properly. The second last one is the skills audit for all the senior managers within the South African Police Service. This became a resolution of Parliament last year already in 2024. It has been said in the annual performance plan and the budget of the South African Police Service that this would be implemented before the end of this calendar year. We're still waiting to see it. The last one is the adequate resourcing of the Independent Police Investigative Directorate. It is very clear to us that very often, as soon as IPID engages in certain types of investigations, it is very difficult for them to conduct such an investigation independently. Many people would differ from me and would say that that is not the case. But when you speak to IPID investigators, you realize what the stresses are that they work under. And it's the same with internal anti-corruption investigations in the South African Police Service. We had a very promising visit recently from the Kenyan version of IPID, IPOA, here at Parliament, arranged by APCOF. And it was a phenomenal discussion to see how independent they actually function. Because of their independence, they don't actually report to the same minister as the police, because otherwise, how do they ensure ultimate independence? I think it was a very useful discussion to be had, and we all agreed that that is the direction we need to move in. Unfortunately, little or no substantive response has been given regarding serious matters of criminal and disciplinary misconduct within SAP's ranks and from the highest to the lowest level, as I mentioned earlier. Many of those flagged as being involved in serious offences are still working, some even out on bail after being charged for significant transgressions. If I'm not mistaken, one member was arrested here close to Cape Town Central with just under 1,000 Mandrax tablets. He's back at work again. The Philippi Training Academy is one example of no action. It's a year later since the committee inquired about corruption. Everyone implicated in the corruption at the Philippi Training Academy are still working there, and the Hawks are still inquiring. Then I want to move over to the matter of Mr. Vusimuzi Cat Matlala. 8 weeks ago, we started questioning matters of how Mr. Matlala continuously gets accreditation from the Private Security Regulatory Authority despite his past transgressions. Now, you'd remember a few months ago, SARS conducted a raid at Miss Mkize's home, the owner of a well-known soccer club. During that raid, a whole cache of firearms were seized. All of those firearms were registered to a security company belonging to none other than Mr. Cat Matlala. Now, after questioning Sira about how on earth they continue to allow accreditation, the answer was that they couldn't find a transgression. Now, if it were you or I that kept firearms illegally at a property where they're not registered to be kept and that's not fit and proper for keeping those firearms, we would not only face criminal procedures, but we would obviously have our firearms seized. Well, all of the firearms were returned to the said security company. And up until now, despite the parliamentary question submitted 2 months ago, again, unfortunately, no answer. The recent arrests of the CI officers by the National Prosecuting Authority's Investigative Directorate Against Corruption is also a potential step to accountability. And obviously now we need to allow the law to take its course. The committee has long advocated for prosecution-led investigations and obviously intelligence-led policing. But for that to happen, we need to clean up the actual intelligence. The potential of this body to assist in also dismantling corruption syndicates must also be protected and promoted, as with all the others. Crime intelligence remains a potent tool to fight organized crime, and the cleaning up of crime intelligence is critical, as it feels like SAPS at the moment is fighting blind. And I use the gang issue all over the country as an example. Let's use Johannesburg, for example. If you speak to many of the anti-gang unit members, and the reason why I keep referring to ground level members is I believe it is the best way to really determine what the reality on the ground is, instead of just waiting for purely a parliamentary report back. They will all tell you that in many of the cases, the informers either don't get paid, or if they don't pay them personally, they don't have intelligence to work on, and they fight blind. Hence the violence that we continue seeing to happen. Then I want to move over to a different topic, and this is the statistics on crime against women and children that you would remember was omitted recently during the crime statistics release. South Africa is facing a serious challenge of gender-based violence and femicide. The omission by SAPS of disaggregated data on crimes against women and children, specifically regarding murder and assault with the intent to cause grievous bodily harm from the fourth quarter crime statistics of 2024-25 financial year, is both concerning and totally illogical. The senior leadership of the South African Police Service has promised the committee that policing will be data-driven to ensure that adequate personnel and skills can be deployed to counter the trends. The decision to omit these disaggregated statistics undermines this pledge and puts into question the appetite to really combat the scourge that we speak about. The committee has written to the South African Police Service for reasons behind the mission and is studying the response. The committee will decide if the reasons provided are adequate or require invocation of its powers to summon the relevant officials to give evidence under oath, affirming as provided for the National Assembly rules and the Powers and Privileges Immunity of Parliament and Provincial Legislatures Act. The omission gives credence to the criticism of the credibility of the crime stats and directly undermines the fight against gender-based violence. We will soon get detailed feedback on data integrity issues with regards to this said data. I think the latter must just be emphasized, that we have received a response and it did indicate serious issues regarding data integrity and data variance on violence against women and children. So there's a massive inquiry needed just regarding that, because it's not just the last quarter's data, it is data from several other quarters too. You will notice on SAPS's website that much of the data that was previously published has since been removed for what I'm told relevant interrogation. Then the gap between arrests and convictions. Operation Shanela has been lauded by the South African Police Service as a highly effective in removing criminals from the streets. In January this year, the minister announced that over 1 million arrests have been made since the inception of this in May 2023. And while this number is laudable, the gap between arrests and convictions continue to be a major Achilles heel for the criminal justice system. We can't praise 1 million arrests if we only have less than 1 or 10% conviction of the 1 million arrests. Then we just have to arrest the same person the next week again. This means that while many individuals are apprehended for the alleged crime, a significant smaller proportion are ultimately found guilty in a court of law. While the committee acknowledges that the South African Police Service cannot combat crime alone, weaknesses within the service must be eradicated to enhance convictions. The strengthening of the detective services to ensure trial-ready dockets is critical because the current ratio of detectives to over 400 dockets is simply not sustainable. Also, the revitalization of forensic science labs to ensure the DNA evidence is produced timeously will enhance responsiveness to the entire system. But most importantly, all of the components of the JCPS cluster must be integrated to close the gap between arrests and convictions. Now, within the next 2 or 3 weeks, we have a session regarding the joint or the integrated justice system, and a lot of money has already been spent on it, and we will hopefully get feedback on what that process is. Because I can tell you now, we've continued with a siloed approach, and one department has different strategic goals than the other, we are being counterproductive. The last few matters. The committee welcomed the Service Enhancement Initiative announced by the Minister and the National Commissioner, and it remains hopeful that the initiatives implemented or will be implemented in a reasonable time. Those are the ones that they recently announced. I think it's about 3 weeks ago. Key among the initiatives is the capacitation of both the detectives and crime intelligence units, albeit still far from the capacity needed, is a welcome intervention, as it will ensure that crime is prevented before it happens, or hopefully so, and effectively also investigated once it has occurred. The 4,000 new detectives and 300 new intelligence operatives add the necessary skills and warm bodies to increase the impact of these critical units. The committee has emphasized the call that that number must be increased over time. Also, it's important that the South African Police Service management look at the functionality of 10111. And it was positive to hear the steps towards digitization over the last week, especially through the budget process. And 10111, as we all know, have faced numerous challenges and was not providing victims with the adequate support when they desperately needed it. These centers are the lifeblood between the police and communities and should never be neglected. Portfolio Committee will soon undertake an oversight, which will include a visit to the relevant centers to ascertain. Ultimately, the South African Police Service must regain trust in communities as a way of ensuring effective interventions to combat crime. I thank you.